Welcome to Turrican!
So let's recap. Turrican was an awesome game. It may have had a couple of isolated design hiccups, but nonetheless it remains one of the finest platform games from the era. Turrican 2 was not only better than the original, but remains to be one of the best games I've ever played. Turrican 3, or Mega Turrican, depending on what system you play it on, was a very interesting experiment, but it could have been expanded further, and most fans would agree that's not as good as Turrican 2. Super Turrican was the best home console translation of the series, and remains to be my second favorite Turrican game. Today we'll be talking about that game's sequel, Super Turrican 2. Much like Turrican 3, the game is recognized as good, however it's considered to be a black sheep in the series. In fact, it's the biggest black sheep in the series. So let's address the elephant in the room and make more analogies to animals along the way. Actually, let's leave the animal stuff to the side. The biggest difference between this and the rest of the series is just how linear most of the stages are. There are some bigger stages, but for the most part the game focuses much more on action. Thankfully, action was already an area of emphasis in the other games, so this change in direction doesn't feel quite as out of place as the beat-em-up oriented Pac-Man World 3, but I've complained about that enough. The funny thing is that this was the first Turrican game that I played, so clearly there must have been something that really got my attention. Actually, there are a few things. To start, the graphics are great, and I should mention that this is one of the only Super Nintendo games to make use of full motion video, and it looks surprisingly good. The soundtrack, like the game itself, takes a different direction. Since the levels are often divided into sections, the music is kept short a lot of the time. As a result of this, the soundtrack is more interactive. In fact, it reminds me a lot of the original Star Wars Rogue Squadron in this area, and if you like the music in that game, you'll probably like this. However, there's a lot more variety here than there is in that game. You have orchestral songs, electronic songs, and even metal. With that out of the way, the song Wormland is what got me interested in electronic music. And that's primarily what I compose, so make of that what you will. On the note of Wormland, one thing that becomes incredibly apparent throughout the game's duration is that this game gets insane. It starts off slow, but when it picks up, it really picks up. One minute you're running along these pipes while this deadly gas is rising, then you're swinging on an aircraft while enemies are flying at you, then you're dropped off on a group of mutant worms before one of them tries to eat you. This is all within the span of 2 levels. Only 2. This game also has some of the best Mode 7 stages that you'll ever play. The game is also really difficult, definitely one of the hardest in the whole series. In the other Turrican games, there are plenty of extra lives if you knew where to look. Here, 1-ups are scarce. The good news is that with every 30 gems you collect, you get an extra life. However, in many of the stages, that's all there is. If you miss one, no 1-up for you. It also doesn't help that more things are trying to kill you than ever before. Thankfully, the enemy placement is actually very well calculated and thought out, so it doesn't come across as unfair, just really difficult. However, that's part of the fun. That, and being a Factor 5 game, some of the level design is actually really clever. For example, when you're on the spaceship exterior in World 2, you'll come across these walkers with welding tools. This at first seems like a minor detail to help set the tone of the level. However, later when you're using the grappling hook to swing across the bottom of the ship, at this point in time, the walkers return using those tools to get you off the ship. Therefore, the previous encounters served as foreshadowing to the events that would take place later in the stage. Aside from that, though, there isn't too much to offer on an artistic level, especially by Turrican standards. I would definitely say that this is the weakest Factor 5 Turrican game. However, just on a spectacle level, it's awesome. So if you're a fan of Super Nintendo shooters and want another one for your collection, this is a great one to get. However, if you want something a little more meaty and has a little more depth to it, play the first one or Turrican 2. Now, this isn't the end of Turrican. Stay tuned for the Turrican Retrospective conclusion.